Skylanders Swap Force was the third Skylanders game, releasing 1 year after Giants, this time developed by Vicarious Visions instead so that they could get these games out on a yearly basis. That was a good idea. Well, we were in good hands. Vicarious Vision made Barbie Magic Genie Adventure and a bunch of unworthy, not even necessary mentioning licensed kids games. Alright, that's a bit considering the reputation of licensed kids games are genuinely not great. This is a game I remember the least out of all the Skylanders games. I can literally only remember the last 2 bosses in this one. In all the others, I can at least remember a few levels or a few more bosses than this. The main thing I remember about this game is thinking this game looked weird and bad, so I liked it the least. Hopefully, I was just disliking things for shallow reasons and I wasn't actually disliking it because this game's not very good, but let's see if that's the case. Story. 4 ancient elementals gather at location to give Kal-El break Isles magic every 1,000 years. Yeah, this doesn't take place in Skylands, it's this new place. But the last ceremony, the darkness attacked and the Swap Force pre-Swap Force became the Swap Force when an eruption of magic came, so they became the Swap Force. Swap Force. 1,000 years-ish later, or it might have been 100, Flynn decides to go have a look at the volcano and then Tessa, this new character, comes to warn Flynn about the Greebles coming to attack. Oh hell yeah, a new villain which isn't KO. So they dive into the volcano. Roll credits. We get our first gameplay section, and wow, this level of geometry for a prolonged period of time is fairly impressive for the Wii, or at least for this series. I couldn't imagine anything like it in the first game. Well, I kind of can, but this is much faster. This is your tutorial segment for the combat, and ew, why do the jumpies look like that? In the original, they obviously weren't realistic, but they still looked very intimidating. Now they just look like goofy goobers, and I don't like it because that's not the intent of their character design. And here it looks dumb in a bad way. I don't overly like the slightly more cartoony style this game goes for. Just contrasts a bit too much with the previous 2 games, which obviously weren't realistic, but they weren't cartoony. They're in like a middle ground, I guess would be the best way. It's hard to describe. Afterwards, Flynn crashes his ship and we have to get up to what ends up being the hub. The graphics are simultaneously impressive if you're just comparing it to the other games, but has a massive downside. Most of the environments seem to have a lot more detail to them, but the game's resolution is kind of low. I'm guessing this low resolution is due to a lot more stuff happening in the Wii version. You can kind of tell by just looking at the cutscene models and animations compared to in-game ones. It's like showing you a nice burger, then it turns out it's just a McDonald's. I believe this is the case for one sole reason. This was made for the HD systems and not for the Wii. This is most obvious with crappy looking player portraits, which I assume look great on better hardware. But here it just looks like a Photoshop job done by me. Yay! Self-deprecating humor! Also, looking at the Soul Gym cutscenes also reinforces that fact considering how good the game looks in them. Now, graphics aren't a lot, but this was extremely noticeable. I personally care more about how the game plays. This game is very, very, very unique from the other Skylanders games I've covered so far. It has a jump button. This honestly does help vary the level design by adding some simple platforming. It's probably a bit too simple, but it's better than just walking everywhere and helps give the terrain some more variation. Also helps make the game feel less restrictive, but at the same time they accidentally make it feel more restrictive. It makes you realize how many invisible walls there are in these games. I kept trying to do stupid dark jumps and take unintended paths, but there were so many invisible walls in my way. Let me die, damn it! Even in spots where it doesn't matter, and even if I jump, I'll still be safe, there's an invisible wall there. This makes the game feel a lot more restrictive than necessary. In the first 2, bounce pads were a replacement for traditional jumps, and that helped make the invisible walls a lot less noticeable, since where you actually could gain elevation was a lot more restrictive, and you couldn't do silly little things as easily if there were no walls at all. And it was also mainly just used as a helpful tool to not fall off in the first game, rather than it also being that, but also occasionally hindering your mobility. The Swap Force themselves are actually pretty cool as a concept. You get to swap their top halves and their bottom halves around to create, in air quotes, new Skylanders. It's actually a really cool mechanic, and I have no clue how they actually made this work. My only complaint is that when the top half starts, their torso is noticeably smaller than the bottom half end, and you can occasionally tell when the top and bottom models aren't connected, which is just hilarious. But these are minor issues overall. In-game they work fairly well. They just overall have more upgrades due to having different ones from the top and the bottom. They do seem a bit stronger than the plain Skylanders, probably just imagining things though. They also bring back the brand new regular Skylanders, as well as the old Skylanders, but with a new move, like Snuggles! Twice! Yeah, I thought my order didn't go through, so I bought a second one, so I now have two. Hell yeah. Back to the first level! Hey, I remember this now. I remember most of these levels again after playing, but the levels are long. It's also not a mountain, but we'll just let that slide. The tree chop setting, while not unique, looks unique, which is nice. It took me 20 minutes to complete this level, which is something I would usually complain about, but actually, this time it wasn't that bad somehow. It still should have been cut back 5 minutes. It does overstay its welcome a tad, but overall not too shabby. Most of the levels in this game felt like they should end 5 minutes earlier. They all overstay their welcome a tad, but it's not too bad, which is nice. I believe this is due to the jump, which I did criticize for earlier, but I think the basic platforming helped a lot in making the game have more variation and feel less repetitive. The worst offender of these levels are the first two ice levels, which are like 40 minutes long each, which gets very annoying. The length of these levels gave me some burnout, which may or may not be affected by the unhealthy amount of Binding of Isaac I was playing at the time. Maybe. The first of these ice levels is straight up my least favorite level. Feels like we go on so many unnecessary detours, and all of them feel like artificial padding, which is unfortunately something that affects the game's story too. A lot of the story feels like padding to extend the game's length, and some feels like filler, which is not what I want to call it, but it does feel that way. We'll take the deserty Earth levels for example. First we have to find a guy. Second, we have to find this other guy in something that looks very similar and save him. Then we go to the Ancient to save her. That middle step felt fairly unnecessary, or even that first step. I do like the Ancient though, she's got a goofy design, but I like it in this scenario. But the entire section feels like the middle chapter could have been trimmed and nothing would have been lost. This could have been applied to the original, but you're always progressing and adding new things to the core. But here you can barely tell your progression like Giants. To give more context around the story, since I've mentioned something that I haven't mentioned before, Chaos is planning to evilize an Ancient so that they spread evil through Skylands instead of magic when this volcano eruption happens soon. He also evilizes Glumshanks in this scene. The story progresses a lot through the game again. We get introduced to Chaos's mother. Whoa! That's not what she looked like in the photos, which I don't remember were there in Giants. What the hell? How are the Skylanders historians gonna react? Over a decade ago. Anyway, it is better designed than that one, and for the role she plays here. She ends up taking over Chaos's role as the main antagonist eventually. This game has all the different mechanics which have been in Skylanders from the first game, with a few extra, specifically collectibles. They added approximately 6 new collectibles to the game, 5 level related collectibles, which are neat in concept but just add on to the collectathon nature. I feel like it's starting to get a bit overboard, especially when the collector's screen is completely stuffed, and then the other 2 weren't, and these new special level specific collectibles are in the second star tab, not the collector star tab. They also introduced this challenge thing, which are used by each Swap Forcean. I don't know what they're called. And they use that each Swap Force's special movement ability. I only have 3 of these, and I should get 1 of each so I can accurately decide if these are all good as a collective, but I don't want to spend $50 doing it. Ignore the fact I have 2 Snuggles. But the ones I have, Flight, Climbing, and Race, are overall underwhelming. Flying is fairly boring and feels too slow. And the same thing applies to Race, but that's just a simpler subway surfers. Climb's okay though, has just about the right speed. It's fairly easy, but it's not too bad. They also add this Portal Master rank based on some achievement thing and the stars you get in the levels, and I have no idea what they do besides letting you place down more legendary treasure, which is so much better in this game than the previous 2. On these podiums in the hub, you can place down the legendary treasure you find to get a boost while you play the levels, which is a mechanic I really like. it gives the legendary treasure a purpose for anyone who tries to find them, and it's significantly better than in the previous 2 games, which I appreciate a lot. I should also mention they add Giants tests only Giants can open, but I believe that they just count towards the normal chest count, so they aren't too bad. It also gives a reason to use the Giants, because they are still terrible. I barely used them in this cutscene real game. There are a lot of cutscenes and unskippable dialogue in this game, like an annoying amount. So much of the dialogue is unrequired for level completion or even knowing what your objective is, because 9 times out of 10 you could know what to do from just looking at it, or just get it really easily by having a camera pan say, "Hey, go over here, idiot!" For some reason though, most of the dialogue's unskippable. Most cutscenes are, so it's just weird, because arguably the cutscenes give more context to what you need to do in each level and the story and goal, but they can be freely skipped. This is confusing because arguably that is what I want to watch more, even though I ended up skipping a lot of them halfway through because I can see fairly easily that they evilize Tessa's bird. Evilized critters are new enemies that are generally specific to a level or zone, unless it's the penultimate boss, which we'll get to later. They're fine. I like them as a concept as they show Chaos's weapon in use, but my main problem is that they feel like they should be powerful, which they are, but their attack cycles are shallow and easy to dodge and avoid. So in my previous example, all of them are like that. Only having one attack would have been fine, but they seem like they're meant to be more special than a general enemy, which in the end it feels like they are just a regular enemy. In the same level as a bird evilizing, I realized this game's hit detection is not the best. The mini-boss at the end of the level was actually horrible in this regard. When I was running away from the missiles and got boosted by the missiles, I still got hit by the consecutive missiles. That shouldn't happen. That is bad design in my opinion. It was an awful boss. One thing that does make the funky hit detection more noticeable is the fact that the screen freeze frames when the moment you die instead of doing this weird bouncy thing like the other games do, making it look like some attacks shouldn't have hit me more. This hit detection only comes up twice majorly, but it made me so skeptical about a lot of other cases of hit detection. I'm not sure why that's the way it is, probably just hitboxes being scuffed or filling the entire model, not just the body to make it feel fairer. I couldn't know, I'm not a data miner. Speaking about bosses, they were mostly mediocre. They all have the same problem. You have to wait to attack them. I personally believe the best way to design a boss is to make them always vulnerable, making you have to plan your attacks around their attack patterns. So make it feels like you're always progressing, seeing the boss bar consistently slowly deplete, and it makes you have to balance your offense and defense. It's fairly boring having to wait for the simple attack cycles to go by, just so then you can attack them for a scripted amount of health. The first boss is the worst in this regard, as it is by far the easiest. The second one wasn't as bad as you're always moving towards a goal, and the third boss was okay. That last one was by far my favorite, but initially it was kind of bad. But the fact that the insanity just kind of increases and the complexity sort of just starts becoming more stressful really elevated it significantly. Having Beyblades and bombs just trying to kill you while you try to finish her off is so much fun, and it's hectic. It still has the defense mode than wailing, which is annoying, but as this game showed earlier, it could be significantly worse. My biggest problem with the bosses, besides the bad design, which might be reason 1 to 200, is the fact that they're considered their own chapter. I might have been calling them levels, but they are referenced to as chapters in game. The bosses being considered their own chapters makes the game seem like it has a lot more content than it actually does, because in the end there are only 12 proper chapters and 5 boss ones, which is a lot more underwhelming than the 17 I thought there were. Honestly, that might have been a good thing because of how long some of these levels get. This game also has 3 side modes you unlock while you just travel through the main story: Arena, Swap Challenge, and Challenge Stages. The Arena's a pretty basic arena, and it's okay, nothing special. The Swap Challenges are just the Swap Forcing sections. Again, I'm not sure if they're different because I didn't try these until much later, and they're okay, and as you can probably tell from my previous statement, they weren't much harder at all. The challenge stages are strange, but in a good way. So you have to complete an objective, and for the one that I tried, it was defeating so many chompies. and the level design just felt a lot like Spyro's Adventure in some aspects, especially those challenge stages, which I don't think I mentioned, because I kind of forgot. Whoops. But yeah, it was quite fun. It wasn't as much fun as Spyro's, but it was still fun. This also makes me feel like I only like the first one so much because of the nostalgia, which is fairly concerning. My favorite of these chapters is chapter 12. I don't know what it's called, so I'll call it the Blizzard one. It's just kind of pretty. The colors are great. It's unique visually compared to the previous two. The game suffers from visual repetition in the second and third world. The little town feels kind of homey. The part where you jump between ice roughs down a river is just fun. About a quarter of the previous two games' levels probably beat this. It was definitely my favorite. Chapter 14 is a chapter I have to mention because I couldn't complete it. So the premise of it is that you have to save the fourth elemental, even though you just saved the third, which is a weird pacing thing, but okay, sure. After you remove all these fire things in a shooty bit, which has happened a few times and is just kind of boring in this game, you have to fight Chaos in this little aircraft thing he's in. It's not very fun, and after you beat him, nothing happens. It just doesn't complete the level. Complete the level. Now! Now! Okay, it's not working. So after disposing of this awful game and doing the fight 3 separate times, I just went onto an older save file to do the last level and 2 bosses. The last level revives the spooky atmosphere of the first castle/lair kind of. The textureless goo present throughout the entire thing, and the insistence of having something goofy does kind of ruin it a bit, but it's so much better than the dullness of it in Giants. Cutscene makes it look extra creepy and just looks great. Most of the cutscenes look great at the very least. CG at least. After a somewhat repetitive level, which I did not remember to put this naturally in, so I'm just gonna say it now, they completely messed up the little puzzle box things. Instead of this little guy, we get these two boars, and it's so much more simpler than the original. In the original puzzle boxes in both games, at least I felt like there was some sort of a challenge or puzzle. Might have been easy, but it was still fun. Here it's just boring and extremely simple. Anyway, after we finish the level, we get to fight Chaos's mother to save Testa, who got kidnapped, which I didn't mention because I am a hack. Anyway, the fight was honestly underwhelming. She just sends out evil-ace critters a bunch, and this big man at one point. Whoa! He was also underwhelming too. The only thing about this fight worth mentioning is how she enters the portal, which is quite cool the first time, but gets unnecessarily repeated twice. After you trap her in the mirror, Skylanders is saved. Wait, I mean Cloudbrick Isles, even though I can barely tell any differences in the game. Yippee. But then Chaos comes and says, haha, I'm just gonna dump all the Evilium or whatever it's called into the volcano. Nice job, you just told us about your plan, so now we can go kill you. After a cutscene I might have skipped, we fight big evilized Chaos, which was very underwhelming. First you have this stomping phase where you attack his feet. Okay. It's fairly easy. Then you attack his teeth, which was very easy. Then you attack for crystals in his ear with his tiny brain, which I think was meant to be a joke, but I never read it as one. Guess what? It was easy. Laser thing which looks cool and is annoying, and say it with me now. I mean McDonald. Wait, no, I mean easy! And it was also underwhelming, which pretty much describes the cap of this game. Easy and underwhelming. After this, you unlock 2 modes. Time attack and score attack, which is just a basic speedrun, which uses an in-game timer and kill enemies, and don't die mode, which are fine, I guess. I just have no reason to play these, but they are there if someone wants to use them. Overall, this game is okay. It is certainly more consistent than Giants, but overall it isn't as good as Spyro's. There's also a few little just annoying things that I left out, like the loading screen in the middle of levels, which just aren't in the previous games, so they're more, I guess, active overall. A lot of the charm that those games had has either worn off by now, or they're just starting to get less time in the oven and less unique ideas, which is concerning to me since I'm already halfway there. Also, I left the worst thing for last. This game has a bad fishing minigame. Actually, let's just load it.